Many here in Harvard. Iyad Ravan from the MIT has just published a paper in Nature, together with a number of colleagues, where he says, and this again for me an example of how we can learn from America, where he says the most important thing on AI will be continuous control of the systems which we have put in place. Because we must follow them to see how they learn and how they mutate, how they behave. To be able to learn about what we have done wrong and how to correct. So as a principle of responsibility, and one could say principle of precaution, we are putting a technology into the world which is extremely powerful, which will learn, which will mutate one way or the other. And we want it to do this. That is the whole efficiency gain. But then we also have to follow it. Like we follow our medicine. When we put a medicine out there, we follow its effects on humans. And if we see that after all we were wrong in the effects, the classic case, too many people dying after all, after having taken the great medicine which was promised to be the great cure, it must be taken off the market or it must be amended in terms of the mix. So these are the three basic principles: lawfulness, robustness, and ethic orientation. And then the group, and now the European Commission, has further developed these principles into 7 more operational rules. The first is that AI should stand under human agency and human oversight. So the human in the loop. And this is not only the turn off button, the emergency turn off button, but if I can come back to the GDPR, where we have an article on automated decision making, human dignity as a fundamental right requires that people have the possibility to say no to automated decision making related to them when this automated decision making touches their fundamental rights. Why? Because if we follow our conception of the human being as laid out in the Bible, as laid out in human enlightenment, in the Enlightenment movement, and laid out in our constitutions, we cannot imagine humans as subjects to become objects of technology. Objects of technology where technology controls them and decides over their fate. It may be efficient to do it, to control people through technology, but it is not the picture of the human being who is responsible and who acts and who has freedom and participates in democracy as the decider that the state or private parties take decisions over the individual in an automated way if the individual says no. So the right to human decision making and the right to appeal is key. Second, robustness of course includes safety, where a technology can do great harm. Great efforts and investments must be made to avoid such harm. Then, of course, privacy, data protection, data governance. And I would say that as regards personal data, meaning data which identifies human beings or makes it possible to identify human beings, GDPR contains already a high percentage of the rules which we need to work well with AI. I would go as far as saying it's very, very difficult to identify additional rules one would need for AI when it processes personal data beyond GDPR. Why? Because GDPR contains this right to individual decision making, It contains human decision making, the right to object to automated decision making. It contains very far-going rights to information about the program, which decides what data are put into it, what is the content of the algorithm, what is the purpose, what is the impact of decision making. All this you can ask to see under GDPR, at least in Europe. And the data protection authorities have the job to make sure that this happens. And GDPR also contains very important rights to delete data or to rectify data. You can ask that your data, if it has been collected somewhere, and if there is no specific legal base which says these data should be stored, and this must be a parliamentary law which says this, you can ask for deletion. You say, I don't like Facebook anymore. I now want to use a different social network, and then Facebook must delete. In the European Court of Justice is now a great case from France about exactly this duty of Google. The French Data Protection Authority, CNIL, at the time under her chairwoman Isabelle Falque-Perrotin, said to Google, you have to delete information about people, and that's it. And Google said, no, we don't think we have to delete. We only think we make the information invisible in Europe, because everything else would be extraterritorial. We want to be able to continue showing this information in America and the rest of the world. And the CNIL said no. Deletion, as the law says, means deletion. And logic imposes that if you have deleted data and therefore complied with the law, you cannot show it anywhere. So this case went up through the French courts and is now before the European Court of Justice, and let's see what the European Court of Justice decides on this. But I would say it's an as dramatic case as the case which is not yet before the court, but certainly will come there. Namely, do we have a right to see the predictions which are made on us by Facebook and Google and others based on the personal data which they have collected about us? Yann LeCun, the French head of AI at Facebook, famously once twittered, we are making 300 trillion predictions a day at Facebook to demonstrate the enormous computing power Facebook has. My answer to that has been yes. And all these predictions are personal data on individuals, and everybody should have the right to see the predictions about themselves and also have a right to the deletion of these predictions. And I'm sure this will also become part of litigation. But one thing is clear in the world of AI, where predicting, of course, will be much more important than collecting, and where influencing people will be more important than predicting. If these informations and tools on people are not falling under the rights of GDPR, and therefore people have the right to see them, to know about them, but also to ask for deletion, the right to data protection in the world with AI will become a very empty right. So I'm very convinced that the courts will take the right decisions here. And when I talk to Americans, there are many Americans who are extremely worried about these potentials, what people can be done to by those who own the data and make predictions or influence them, whether it's the state snooping or whether it's big business snooping. And by the way, again, a learning from America. The best book right now on the market comes from a Harvard Business School professor on all this in the private sector, not government. And it's called Surveillance Capitalism, and the author is Professor Shoshana Zuboff of Harvard Business School. It's a fantastic book which I suggest for everybody to read to understand into which power constellations all of us as individuals, we are living already, and how the world could look tomorrow if we don't build a system of both serving democracy and the functioning of the rule of law and fundamental rights in terms of maintaining our political system. And I have to say, not much in America about the issues in the political system coming from technological systems, but also a system which protects us as individuals. So GDPR helps in this path into a world of rule by technology. But the question after the ethics principles, which I will first complete and then I will discuss this question a little bit with you, is can we leave it beyond GDPR at ethics, or do we need new law? But first, what are the other ethics principles which were put down by the European AI high-level group? So we discussed human agency and oversight, robustness and safety, privacy and data governance. Fourth, transparency. And here, very important, we all need to know, are we dealing with a human or are we dealing with a machine? And this is something which I would say cannot be left to voluntary ethics. You know, one company does it like this and the other does it like that. No. This is something where we need a law, which makes it clear that those who employ these technologies, when these technologies serve dialogue with human beings, the human must be made aware, hello, it's a machine speaking. And this is, of course, a fortiori extremely important when we come into the democratic environment and closer to elections. I mean, just imagine, you start your telephone in the morning, you look at Facebook and Twitter, and there are all these messages in favor of one candidate. And you think, gee, you know, everybody supports that person. And it's all machine produced. That's not possible. So I think already for that reason, but also for reasons of transparency in contracting and for reasons of human dignity, we need to be made aware right now it's a machine sending you a message or it's a machine speaking to you. Diversity and non-discrimination was mentioned. It's a huge debate in America. Very good papers coming from New York, AI Now, Kate Crawford, Meredith Whittaker, and so on, these scientists at New York University. Great technology scrutiny. I think there America has a huge advantage over Europe, because both America develops the technology, so you are closer to technology, you are social scientists, your lawyers, sociologists, anthropologists are closer to technology, but also, of course also closer to the failure of technology when served to the risks of technology and also to the abuse of technology. And sixth principle, and this is where the paper falls very nicely: societal well-being, environmental well-being, and accountability as the seventh principle. So on accountability, just a side remark, I'm a great friend of Julia Engwin, the great former Wall Street Journal journalist who went then to ProPublica and just wanted to start a newsroom called The Markup, where she received 20 million from Craig Newmark. Again, something which we can only dream of in Europe. She developed this concept of tech accountability journalism, which is absolutely necessary these days, because let's be honest, if we don't have strong tech accountability journalism, many of us, including myself, we would not be able to do our job. There is a problem in the technological world which goes beyond, let's say, commercial interests or abuse of technology, which is the simple fact that the technology becomes so complicated that you need mediators to explain, to help understand, including helping understand policymakers and helping understand other parts of science to take a view on the technology. So Julia Engwin has achieved very, very great things. I still remember when in the beginning of GDPR, so this is 6 or 8 years ago, suddenly the Wall Street Journal started a series of articles, all investigative journalism, under the title, What They Know. And they were Facebook, Google, and so on. And Julia Engwin and her colleagues in each of these series brought up stunning revelations of what they know and what they do with it. She, for example, I think if I remember correctly, was the one who broke to the world that there are many websites which automatically raise prices if you log in with an Apple computer rather than with a Windows computer. The assumption on these websites being, well, if you have an Apple computer, you have paid more, you have more money, so let's raise the prices. You know, fantastic journalism, very difficult to document. She also documented, you know, for me, I still remember these things because that was great learning. The price of the father who starts to get these mails, baby diapers, baby nourishing, and so on, and through the mailings, the commercial mailings from Walmart and others, learns about the pregnancy of the daughter. Because the daughter had been profiled, she had searched, she had been in shops looking at these things, and the mailings come home, and so, you know, the companies, the profilers, the technological automated profile of the human knows earlier that the daughter is pregnant than the daddy. So this is another stunning example of, I would say, you know, what has America has given to the world, because on us, this series by Julia Engwin in the Wall Street Journal was very influential, and I wish her well in the present discussions on starting her newsroom markup and the difficulties which she encounters in that context. So I wanted to discuss with you as a last contribution to today's conference the question, do we need new law, or can we just leave it all to ethics and self-regulation? And I would say we need to give ourselves, or have to search for the parameters for decision for this question. And there is a parameter which exists in American law and also in many countries in Europe and European law, which I would call the parameter of essentiality. So if something is essential, it needs to be dealt with by the democratic legislator, because that's what democracy is about. Democracy is not the important things are decided by the executive or by business, and for the rest, members of parliaments, Congress, Senate, European Parliament, you know, they can talk. Democracy means rule by the people through their elected representatives. And the principle of essentiality says everything which is important in society in the end needs to be decided there. And what is the criteria for deciding what is important? There are two criteria. First, whenever there is an ingerence into civil liberties and fundamental rights, the classic American sentence, no taxation without representation, is an expression of the principle of essentiality. So when individual rights are concerned of people, and second, if there are important considerations of the good functioning of the state, of democracy, for example. So if these are our parameters, what new law may we need on AI? And of course, ideally agreed globally with our partners around the world. But I also say, having been in public law issues and private law issues in shipping in the previous job as the maritime coordinator of the Commission. Of course, nobody in Europe is ever going to take the commitment, and nobody in America, that we will only give ourselves rules in our democratic process only if they are already agreed internationally. Because that would mean we have to wait for 20 years, as we can see in shipping. Shipping is probably the best example of a sector where the principle that rules must come from the IMO has led to a hugely structural under-regulation of shipping. So yes, we will look, of course, and the Commission is already starting this. In France, we have had a great example also of diplomacy. You know, there are many mosaic stones of diplomacy which are being put in place to convince partners to take others along. And maybe one day we will arrive at some international law rules on AI. But I don't think that that is a precondition for doing what is necessary in democracy from time to time, namely to decide, like we have decided on GDPR. Of course, in parallel, we have worked on the Convention 108 in the Council of Europe, which goes beyond the European Union. The Council of Europe is an international organization where, for example, Canada has also signed up. And we have a number of South American countries who are looking at the Convention of Council of Europe Convention on Data Protection and Privacy. The US has signed up to the protocol of the Council of Europe on data security, cybercrime. And in the same way, the US has signed up to the Cybercrime Convention of the Council of Europe. The US could also sign up to the Convention 108 on data protection of the Council of Europe. So the Council of Europe is a classic instrument for us to go beyond just the European Union and create international consensus which has the form of soft law and sometimes also hard law. So yes, of course, we're looking for broad consensus, and I think we are now in a finding and discussion phase. But I would say in the same way that we need a healthy criticism of the saying that the internet must remain undivided, because if you go too far with this principle, it means no democracy can take any rules autonomously, because that leads to a fragmentation of the internet. You have a conflict between those two principles, and GDPR clearly was a step where Europe decided to do some things autonomously which have an impact on the internet. In the same way we have done this before, I don't think that we, or for that matter others, would be ready to precondition lawmaking when it is necessary in a democratic process to prior international law. So when we think about, therefore, applying the principle of essentiality, it's not so clear and not so easy to find new areas where law is necessary. Because, as I said already, whenever AI treats personal data, for us GDPR is applicable. That is already a huge element of protection. What about if AI doesn't deal with personal data? Should we extend key principles of transparency, of data protection, to AI working with non-personal data? I think that is a legitimate question which needs to be discussed about. And I could imagine that there are many who say, yes, some of the principles should be extended, and we need a law not only because of the principle of essentiality, we need law also to create a level playing field. And that is, of course, a very, very important concern for economic development. You want a level playing field where everybody plays by the same rules. And if you leave things to self-regulation, that's not the case. You don't have a level playing field. So that will be my final remark. Why is Mark Zuckerberg, in his article of 30th of March in the Washington Post, suddenly saying we need laws? We need laws on privacy, we need laws on content regulation, we need laws on portability. By the way, portability is already part of GDPR. You have a right to the portability of your data from one service provider to the other. I would say, first, there is of course some learning in people and organizations, and it's good that Silicon Valley moves on from a very irresponsible, let's just do it, let's break things and let's excuse later, to we take responsibility, we are corporate citizens, we are working with democracy, not against it. And if you read the book of Shoshana Zuboff about democracy attitudes in Silicon Valley, remember, Harvard Business School professor, you get very, very worried. So I would say there is hopefully an element of learning, that's good. There is maybe also an element of strategy, which pertains to level playing field. Because in a startup economy, in an economy where technology moves very fast, if you realize that your enterprise is under constant public scrutiny to be ethical, to be good, to do the right thing, you start thinking about level playing field. Why us always? Why not everybody? And maybe this argument that the rules should apply to everybody is also an important argument for increasingly for those who previously, I can tell you that from my own experience, lobbied heavily, for example, against GDPR. So where does this leave us at the end? We want a level playing field. We want rules to be enforced also against those who don't want to play ball. And there we learn from America all the time, because when it comes to the enforcement of laws, America is certainly a great example of a pretty tough hand. We want democracy to live. That means also our parliaments have to do their job. We want to see them acting. We want to see them take responsibility and put good rules in place. We don't want parliaments which do nothing in the public interest. I think we can be happy if parliaments come up with laws and take responsibility. And a discourse which on the one hand says there's an issue in democracy. We have not enough people engaging in democracy. We have people on the street, les gilets jaunes. We have Orban in Poland, autocratic tendencies and so on. Yes, we have a problem with democracy. But if we have a problem with democracy, one way to revive democracy is also to say, let democracy do its job. So my personal view is here very clear. The neoliberal discourse of we don't want laws. It can all be done in self-regulation, ethics codes, and so on, is part of how the modern economy-driven discourse has undermined democracy. So if we want democracy, I think we have to work with democracy and make it useful and come up with good laws which reply to the principle of ethics, which reply to the principle of essentiality, which cover the field where we are convinced that we want a level playing field, and where we are therefore convinced that we want rules which are enforceable. And I think the task before us on AI is to identify those fields where this is necessary. In Europe, I can say I don't find much. I gave you one example where I'm convinced that we need a binding law, and that is the transparency principle, namely that the platforms have to take responsibility that one sees it's a bot, it's a machine, and also on the internet, those who employ outside the platforms, just directly on the internet, automated messaging, they must make this transparent. Like, by the way, any newspaper which takes paid advertisement must make clear, is this a journalistic contribution or am I doing here PR? Yes, so we impose this burden, quote, quote, on our press, which, by the way, competes with the platforms, with the technology platforms, often on very unfair terms. And we don't have such a principle yet relating to the internet generally, and a fortiori not to AI. So I think, that's one example. In America, probably a little bit more work is necessary because you don't have rules like the GDPR. But for Europe, I would say that to give a frame to AI, it is possible to define a few limited areas where the law actually would also help innovation by increasing the acceptability, the usability, and the take-up of the technology in society. Thank you very much, and happy to discuss with you.
Well, thank you for those very thoughtful and far-ranging remarks. I've asked Paul to sort of serve as the moderator, and he's agreed to do that. But you're not confined essentially to responding to what Paul said, so that if you have some observations, comments that add to the discussion, that's also kind of within the realm of what we'd like to see here. So, but Paul's going to kind of point fingers as to who speaks next. So,
please.
This was really a very interesting and provocative and thorough presentation. I'd like to ask you to. This was a thorough and very informative presentation. I found it very important. I'd like you to comment and expand across any of the issues that you talked about the precautionary principle that you identified earlier, which has become a cornerstone of many international issues.
Okay, very quick on the precautionary principle. So the basic book of philosophy is Hans Jonas, The Principle of Responsibility, in German 1979, in English somewhere there in those years. What did he say? He said, if there is a technology which potentially, but we're not sure of this, but potentially could either lead to the extinction of mankind or change in a dramatic way the way we live as humans, and he was thinking at the time about atomic power, but already also about life prolongation, making people live 200, 300 years, then we have a double duty in case of uncertainty of information about what this technology will lead to. The first duty is to invest in our knowledge about what the risks of this technology are and how to mitigate them. And second, we must put ourselves emotionally into a state which allows us politically together to take the necessary and sometimes hard decisions today which are necessary to avoid the possible but uncertain very negative consequences in the long future. So that's the gist of his book, of the Principle of Responsibility. And this was taken up in law in the EU treaties, first in the area of environmental protection, and today the Court of Justice in Europe says that it is a general principle of law. It is a principle basically of foresight, of technology assessment. And you had this in the US, you had the US Office of Technology Assessment in Congress, a very, very important institution, but it was done away with by Ronald Reagan at the time when he was president. I don't know whether it was done by him, but it was during his reign. I have written a paper which is called Constitutional Democracy and Technology in the Age of AI, published by the Royal Society in the UK last year, October, where I said, based on this principle of precaution, we need 3 levels of impact assessment of this new technology. First, we need the political impact assessment, and that's what's happening now. Lawmakers, governments must make up their mind and start to understand this technology and its implications. Second, we should oblige by law each developer, each company which develops AI and then puts it on the market to do an impact assessment. And impact assessment means 360 degree, how does it touch individual rights, how does it touch society, democracy, rule of law, fundamental rights, safety, sustainability, ecologically, and so on. And third, we need a right for the individual to understand how this technology impacts him or her. So 3-level impact assessment, I would say, should be required by law. In Europe, basically in GDPR, it is required whenever there's personal information involved. So yeah, that's the precautionary principle in a nutshell. I think there was a question here, yeah? Okay, yes?
In your opinion, where do you think the burden lies when it comes to regulators, policymakers, business professionals, academics, especially as GDPR comes to light, right? So with GDPR, it's a question of, when you're scrolling through Netflix and you're given a recommendation, nobody thinks twice. It's almost a happy surprise. But if it's healthcare data, if it's the pregnancy piece that you were talking about, sometimes it takes a while for consumers to have the light bulb go off of, well, this is not convenient necessarily, but it's actually troublesome. So who pushes the envelope further, and then how does everybody collaborate to actually make a difference in the world around us?
Yeah, I have become increasingly pessimistic about the ability of individuals to avail themselves of their rights. I think individuals need the rights, even if they don't avail themselves, they need them. But I am convinced that you always have to make sure that in addition to individuals, in these very sensitive areas where there's a huge complexity and also huge intransparency in data protection, we don't know what the state is doing with the data. Big state, that's the risk side of our paper, here one has to admit. What is the state doing with this great data center? Very risky, this whole centralization. But also big companies, what are they doing with the data? We don't know. And therefore you need, in addition to giving individuals rights, you need public authorities or public enforcement systems and rights for NGOs, for example, to bring class actions. So it's never sufficient in these critical areas of public interest to only dole out individual rights. So you need institutional, let's say, add-ons and certainty, at least to some respect. The system will never be perfect. And of course, all law is an allocation of risks and opportunities in society. And so I would always tend to give, let's say, more burden to those who make much money with technology. They have to carry also the bigger part of the burden in terms of burden of proof. We are complying, everything is fine. But also in terms of burden of investment in the public interest.
There's a microphone.
Yeah.
Thank you for your very, very interesting and thorough talk. So part of the bedrock core DNA of Silicon Valley is this notion of iterating, and you hear the term often, fail fast. And this is fueled by enormous concentrations of wealth and incentives. And so given the complexities that you have elaborated so clearly, how do you, without creating a very complex set of laws and regulations, how do you counter this enormous push to try things out, see if they break, and then do it again? iterate. How do you do that?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, one reason why I come to America is that I'm convinced, many of those big issues of how we're going to live in the future will be solved in America, for that reason you just mentioned. Yeah, because the money, the technological capacity is here, and this whole discourse is about how you will live first of all. And for us, every issue which is solved in America is good. Yeah. And the more issues are unsolved in America, the more problem we also have with it. Now, first thing I would say, and I say this knowing that I discuss here with MIT colleagues and so on, we cannot apply the engineering view of the world of perfection to regulation by law. It is normal that laws are not as complex as the realities. Laws have to simplify, they have to typify. It is also normal that they are not perfect, because in democratic process, alone for that reason, you must make compromises to get majorities. And so, to talk about the law as if it's a code, it's a huge mistake, because it insinuates the law should be as well written as the code, which is user-friendly, and you just push a button and everything is fine. No, laws are messy. And everybody who requires otherwise, and these easy sentences like, we'd rather have no law than a bad law, typical Silicon Valley speech, is anti-democratic, because it always leads to having no law. So I would say first, the bar on perfection, let's be realistic. Second, let's make technology neutral regulation. It is not right to say the law must update as fast as possible, as fast as technology. We cannot, in democratic process, have an update 01, 02, 03 like we have it for code every 6 weeks. And there's also a good reason why we don't need it. Because programs are written for stupids. Who are the stupids? The computers. Laws are written for human beings who can think themselves. So what does it mean to have a technology neutral law? It is a law which uses concepts like GDPR does, which change their real meaning in the real world with technology evolving and with business models evolving. The greatest technology neutral laws are our constitutions. They hold for hundreds of years, and their meaning evolves because judges give them legitimately new meaning as the world changes. So that's the second. And the third thing, I think, and that's probably the most challenging in democracy today, if you want to counter big money and the powers, as Hans Jonas already described them, the combined powers of technology development and capitalism, combined. Jonas said they brush away everything if we don't fight. The only way you can do it is by engaging. That's what democracy is about. I mean, you must make up your mind where you stand and what you do. If you stand on the side of the fatalists, including on the left, who say democracy can never do anything else than what the corporations want, well, that's your problem. I would say there is ample evidence that democracy can make a difference, even against very forceful powers of technology and capitalism and money combined. But to be able to do it, one needs a lively democracy, one needs parties which work, one needs to engage. That's there is no other secret sauce, I would say.
My question is about domain and scope. Let's assume that we agree with everything. There's no reason not to. As I listen to this, if I go to a university and I say, tell me about AI, we're going to talk about deep learning, machine intelligence, neural networks. As someone who had a 40-year career in software development, I've never met a module that didn't have human judgment in it. So, isn't this about everything? Or is it only, so how do you dimension the scope of all these things?
Yes. So that's what I'd said at the outset. The technology policy today, internet policy, but also AI policy, is actually societal policy, because it pertains, first of all, to to all walks of life, to all people. Everybody is concerned. And then I would say we therefore need to think this policy as a societal policy. It's not a technology policy, it's a societal policy. We shape our lives deeply with this. It's about democracy, rule of law, human rights, and so on. But, of course, things don't end with the general laws and the general principles. In addition to the general, we need, as we have always done it in technology regulation, sector by sector specific rules. You have very detailed, medical appliances, medicine approval, financial markets, and so on. And this debate is still before us. I mean, I cannot say anything about it, but I can imagine that when you look closer into the sectors, there will be additional complexities with AI which have to be mastered, like they have been mastered in all past technologies which we have put on the world. The internet is an exception and software are exceptions in the terms of how under-regulated they are. Normally technologies and markets have been pretty strongly regulated by law, and actually I would say let's go back to the normal. This whole discourse that the law cannot work anymore, it's too slow and so on, I think it's very interest-driven. It disables democracy, it ignores the capabilities of making technology neutral laws which hold for a long time into the future, and it has allowed these big companies to be, amazingly irresponsible and still very popular. That is the amazing thing of the internet giants. Huh? Yeah.
Thank you. So I have a comment for the meeting rather than a question. As background, I direct the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT that studies how digital and physical relate. And one of my students, Jason, built and runs all the computers at Facebook. And my student, Rafi, built and runs all the computers at Twitter, because I taught them to not believe in computer science, but understand the physics. And in fact, Rafi just stepped down from rebooting the DNC's computing for security. The reason I mention all of that is to identify something that I think is missing in this discussion, which is I worked once removed with Turing and von Neumann and the founders of machine intelligence, and the last thing both studies is how digital becomes physical. So von Neumann studied self-reproducing automata. Turing studied morphogenesis, how genes give rise to form. The research in my lab was doing things like how do you create synthetic life in the Star Trek replicator and self-reproducing machines. And all of that is AI, but it's AI not in the cloud, but embodied physically. And it has a very immediate implication, which is we began an outreach project from that, setting up community fabrication labs that let you go from digital to physical. Those have gone viral, they're doubling exponentially. There's over 1,500 now, they double every year and a half. Very strong concentration in Europe. There's a bill coming in the House and Senate for universal access to them. And so in many of the places where there's so much attention to income inequality, import, taxation, all of the issues everybody's talking about, what that's missing is an assumption that computing is in the cloud and work is jobs, is money, is production at the end of long supply chains. When you cross from digital to physical, it really doesn't end run around that. So for example, we're working with a group of cities around the world that started in Barcelona, where there's a great design sense but 50% youth unemployment, where they're deploying digital fabrication as part of urban infrastructure. So if you live in the city, you can produce what you consume. A growing number of cities around the world are signing up to this. It's really a third digital revolution. First was communication, then computation. This is now fabrication. It's a revolution happening not where all the attention to AI is happening, but all the research behind AI is leading to it. And so it's the observation that this whole discussion is missing an opportunity to directly impact what you eat, how you build shelter, what you consume, by segregating AI to something that happens in the cloud. Some of the most exciting impacts and some of the most exciting research is on going from digital to physical. It really is a revolution, but it's sort of out of sight for a lot of this discussion.
I can only say thank you, and maybe it should be added to the paper. I mean, because this is, of course, a very important remark. I was not even aware of this mega trend. You describe it as a mega trend. So thank you very much for the remark, and maybe the authors can take up a few sentences, because, as you say, by coming back to the physical, if I understand you correctly, it's a very important contribution to work, labor, but also real living conditions, as you say, food and so on.
Just to respond to Megatrend, it's one very strongly so. So an early mentor for what I'm doing on this was with Gordon Moore, who of course did Moore's Law. If you look at the data for what I'm describing for this now digital fabrication scaling, there's another thing like Moore's Law called Lass's Law, but there's more data than when Gordon Moore had. This is roughly a decade of exponential scaling. And in fact, Bin Cerf is really working with us on a part of a corner of it. So it really is a trend, not as a projection, but just as data in the present. But the challenge I would give all of you is an awful lot of what government does you don't need in this world. And a lot of what government isn't doing you do need in this world. And in particular, a lot of authority in a world where anybody can make anything comes from soft power and lateral alignment, not top-down control. And so it really requires revisiting a lot of the assumptions I heard so far today about what is governance.
Mm-hmm. Right. Any other
question?
Yes.
In the area of personal privacy, sometimes called the right to be forgotten, how do you balance that fundamental right to privacy with the need for people to know what public figures have done? Suppose there was a provocateur who had written extensively about suggesting genocide or ethnic cleansing. And he had written intemperately in his 20s, but now he's running for office. Should that person be able to insist that my past be forgotten and unobtainable? How do you separate out what we must have access to and what the things that I tweeted when I was in high school should disappear?
Yes. Very clear answer. No. This cannot be. So there is a long line of jurisprudence by the European Court of Human Rights which started much before the internet and which relates to press, namely to the question, the reporters are going after you and they start photographing you wherever you walk, and they photograph you in your garden, and they photograph you on the balcony, and maybe with your girlfriend and so on. And how far is that justified, that intrusion into your life by press? And the criteria which the European Court of Human Rights developed, and there are hundreds of cases on this, for press is the legitimate public interest in a democracy. So, if there is a reason in a democracy to say, yeah, but people need to know, then you have no right, neither that journalists report about you to defend against that, nor a right to be forgotten. So the example you gave now is absolutely clear. I mean, even if it was in the 20s, I would say if it was with 14, underage, that it gets more difficult. But if it was in your 20s, and now today you are a candidate for public office, the answer is very clear. There is no right to be forgotten. So the right to be forgotten is very, very important for the many very normal people who have nothing to do with politics. The famous case decided by the European Court of Justice was about a Spanish man who had divorced and had not paid his alimonies, and there was therefore an order to confiscate his house and auction it by the state to get the alimony money basically back, which the state had outlaid for the woman. And this was 20 or 30 years ago. And he said, look, now I've paid, this is 30 years ago, this was my private life, everything is okay now, I'm paying since ages, but my life is destroyed by the fact that every time somebody puts my name into Google, this comes up, can't find a new girlfriend and so on. Yeah. So there the Court of Justice said that goes too far, this intrusion, there is no public interest about this guy. But the court said, it's of course different when there is a public interest in democracy, and it is also different when it's journalists who make the investigation, because freedom of the press is something that Google cannot avail itself of. So that is the line to draw. Not clear? No, it's not American, I know, but I mean this is a long tradition of European press jurisprudence related to the press. I mean, we have had this discussion beyond the right to be forgotten about what to do about hate speech and incitement to violence on the internet. And I think my view is, I negotiated a code of conduct with Google, Facebook, Twitter, and so on what they should be doing against hate speech and incitement to violence on the internet, is that if you don't do anything about incitement to violence and hate speech on the internet, you actually reduce the freedom of speech. Because in this age of the internet, there are many journalists, especially women, who start to become extremely trolled, and they get these remarks like, making terrible threats of rape and so on, whenever they publish something. And we even have in Europe, let's say, honorary mayors of small villages who step down because on the internet they are so put under pressure and hated with this. And we have an increase of 400% of political violence, against refugees, Muslims, but also anti-Semitism. And all this is not conducive to free speech. So I think the extreme incitements to violence and hate speech, it simply has to be forbidden to do this in the public space, because if you don't do it, and if you allow the scums who do it to speak freely, it means many others will not dare anymore to open and speak, and many will not dare to take public office, and many journalists will not dare to write anymore what they should be writing. So it's a different approach than in America, and I wish you good luck with your approach.
So we spent a bit of time talking about the rights of the citizen, but I think we should also spend a bit of time just thinking about the responsibilities of the citizens, and that every time that we rebroadcast something that may or may not be correct, we have a responsibility. And so in many items of ethics, be it hate speech or forwarding any information that is not substantiated, I think I hear very little warning of the citizen. And then I like to comment about the popularity of the internet giants. So I'm constantly confronted with people who complain about this stuff, and yet everybody orders from Amazon, everybody takes Uber, everything, because my privacy and my comfort dominates. And I'm going to pick and choose what I feel to be ethical about. So I might be a vegan, but I'll take Uber all over the place. So I wish that our global leaders would tell us that we're responsible for the world that we're creating.
Yeah, I think you are of course right, and I would underwrite everything which calls on the responsibility of everybody, and then the next thing is always let's do more education and in the schools and so on. All this is correct, but it's not sufficient. And it is an easy way out for those who don't want to take the measures which are necessary and which go beyond. Because, nobody has a problem, and especially not the big corporations in their profit models have a problem if big education is done and if individuals should be responsible in using the technology and so on. These discourses are right, but they are not sufficient, and they deflect, and they are used proactively to deflect attention from the more hard laws which we need. It's a classic lobby thing to say, yes, but before we do this law, let's first do education. And there I would say, of course we have to do education, and we have to do responsibilizing of individuals, but it's not sufficient.
So my comment was not, and if I misspoke, that's not how I meant. I didn't mean it as an instead, I meant it as absolutely fundamental also.
Yes.
Because the problem, if you do not have the also,
Absolutely.
then I sit around saying, well, the state is taking care of all this.
Yeah.
And then that's all me and my responsibility. And then I think we are back to the totalitarian
Absolutely.
state model. So I think it's as fundamental to democracy
Yes.
as good jurisprudence.
Quick question. So let's say I'm a user of Facebook, and I set up an account, and they ask me if I agree with terms. And it may be thousands of pages, but ultimately I agree.
Yeah.
Why would any regulatory agency or
I tell you.
have any right
Yes.
to change the agreement I had, and I'm sure they've used that argument.
Yes, and they will. So this is maybe, I don't know how American law here is. So we have two bodies of law in Europe which make a difference in this context. The first body is law is called the laws on standard contract clauses. So these are unnegotiable, you just have to sign, and here's a small print. So in case of such clauses, if they are unfair or surprising, they are void ex officio. That means a judge looks at them and just says, come on guys, this is not okay, this is not okay, this is not okay. In this way, by having a law which says this, we have a directive in Europe which says this, you basically create the consumer trust which is necessary, because otherwise people would really feel, oh God, I have to read this all the time and I trust nobody anymore. So that's the first body of law which protects people against these clauses containing things which are, to say it simply, not okay. The second principle is specific to data protection, and we already had it in the directive on data protection of 95, and now again in the GDPR, and it says basically the consent must be informed and specific. And there are lawyers, hundreds, maybe thousands of lawyers, who try to make their money from writing in such a way that it's as unintelligible as possible, but when they go to court they can say, yeah, but this was informing and it was specific. So this is what the litigation is about, and often, not always, but often the courts come to the conclusion that these long clauses are not informing people and they are not sufficiently specific. But if they are, then you're right, nobody can say anything about it.
Particularly in the case where if in the contract itself allows you clear options on your own personal data.
Yes, if it's clear and specific and informed, it's okay. By the way, not for the state. The state can never use consent as a legal base. The state always needs a law for data processing. That's also very important. Only for private parties. Right. I see, it's like, when I played in the school band, we started with a full audience, and then at the end of the concert, three people left. So, okay, now I don't want to...
harnessing complex decisions that humans make. And it's knowledge map based, so it is humans or subject matter expertise are codifying their own knowledge in that, making it available at scale. We work with a variety of different sectors, and obviously it's community based, and it's explainable and transparent, right? So you could, if regulators come knocking, you can go in and say, well, the certainty factor is this, because you can go in and map out exactly why those decisions are made. We're very strongly working with different policymakers, going into discussions with regulators and whatnot, but we have this issue where the big companies obviously are front row, they're talking about transparency and sometimes creating some noise around it, right? What would your advice be around, small fish who are trying to make an impact, trying to make a difference, have arguably an innovative technology, but how do you get a seat at the table to even make an impact if that's the desire?
Well, I think if you look around in the UK and Ireland and also in the US, there's a number of small companies which are competitors of the big guys in their field or in adjacent field, who are extremely active in terms of trying to directly have policy dialogues, but also they orchestrate complaints against the big companies, whether competition complaints, abuse of dominant position would be a classic. In search, Google has 95% dominance in Europe. So, if you have something to say, you have to say it to a competition authority, say it to the European Commission. The other thing is complaints in terms of data protection, complaints to data protection authorities. you know, if you find a citizen who you can convince that there is abuse, you know, illegality, and your business model would show, would not have this illegality, you know, that's what they do. That's the technique. But, you know, again, there's no golden bullet in an economy and in a society where you have a few very, very strong players. That is always a problem, as America and Europe knows from history. Right. Thank you very much.
So we'll wrap here in a couple of minutes, but I do want to call, Tuan has a few remarks to make. Elliot, would you like to talk a little bit about Washington for a minute or two at some point here too? Right. Okay. Yeah, Tuan first.
Thank you, Tom. You can see today Governor Michael Dukakis cannot come here because of kidney health problem. But that is make us think about how we can engage our great people joy and discussion, because with great people always busy and not so easy to engage on the day or time. So by that reason, Boston Global Forum and Governor Michael Dukakis discussed and make that the format AI World Society Summit. That means we start from today, AI World Society G7 Summit conference, but we will continue discuss by online and make for continue receive comments, discussion, and talk by video, by online. We will start, that is the model, new model. And we look forward our people here give talk, discussion by online, and we will post a section, AI World Society Summit. Our paper today, we continue discuss, and I hope we get great ideas, and we can collect in later July. That is our new format, and Governor Michael Dukakis will send a letter to introduce and call for our people and leaders. So far, some leaders of government and leaders of civic society and thought leaders will engage and talk with us in this model. And we can see that the windsurf is that is the first for AI WS Summit, even he video here. So that model we do. And thank you so much for your great thing. And also, Governor Michael Dukakis would like to deliver message that the world AI today, we need to align many resources in the world to make the world a peaceful, safe, and new democracy. And we together with the World Leadership Alliance Club de Madrid to continue to develop and work for the initiative, and also AI World Society Summit. Yes, so thank you so much, and we continue to talk.
So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes. Thank you very much. Thanks, Tuan. Great presentation, Paul. This is amazing. So some of you may have been in previous discussions here at the conferences with Mike Dukakis. And last year, they contacted us. I produce, I'm the chair of AI World, and now a new event with the Dukakis Global Forum, AI World Government. And I think the discussion that we just had, particularly with a gentleman, I think he might have left, talking about new ways of thinking about AI governance, has been in the middle of the evolution of the AI industry. I've been in it for over 25, 30 years. It's always been in the background, and since GDPR and the efforts of the European Commission and so forth, the last few years has just seen the world kind of exploding around privacy and explainability and bias and trust. And what we've done is we produce AI trends, and I created a few years ago what's now one of the largest AI commercial events in the world, AI World. But Last year, in our collaboration with the Dukakis Global Forum and the production of some publications on cybersecurity and AI world ethics, we felt as a publishing company we could really help very powerful speech there, I guess. Powerful message. I was just going to say we're trying to amplify the efforts, and obviously that read my mind before. Maybe there's an AI machine learning system operating here somewhere. But our goal is to try to amplify everything that happened here this morning. So what we announced last in December at the conference here was that we were going to produce a summit on AI governance, big data, and ethics in Washington, D.C. at our AI World Government event. The Dukakis Global Forum is an international sponsor, as is the Canadian government. We have the gentleman who wrote, Lord Clement Jones, who wrote the ethics for the UK. Hopefully France will join us, and we have the IEEE and just a number of people who participate here. Nosley is one of the speakers, Mark Rottenberg, a lot of the people who are in the circle here at Harvard and MIT, as well as vendor. We're trying to bring everybody together. So the idea of trying to bring industry, bring researchers, bring nations together in a discussion to help accelerate it, particularly with the National Security Commission on AI that we're working with, and VinSurf is part of that, people-centered computing. So we're kind of in the middle of so many exciting things happening right now that you know, building these conferences are great because we can get everybody here and maybe have 1,000 people together and just help spread the word and accelerate the great messages that are you've heard this morning. So we have some brochures. We literally right off the press, so if you want one, I have one right here. If you want to give me a card, happy to send you a brochure. And I hope to see you in June. So thank you very much.
Elliot, thank you. Well, thanks again to the Consul General, to Paul, for those wonderful remarks, thoughtful, far-reaching, and thank you all for spending time with us this morning. And we'll see many of you back in September for our next Boston Global Forum conference. Thank you.